Hey heroes, welcome to On Scene First. I'm your host, Tracy Eldridge. With over 25 years in public safety, I am wicked excited and honored to bring you entertaining, educational, and empowering conversations with public safety difference makers who are harnessing the power of out-of-the-box thinking when it comes to the use of the latest and greatest must-have technology tools, a people-first leadership approach, and mental health resources to save lives on both sides of the call. Before we get started, I would like to thank our hero sponsor, Squad Life, a law enforcement and Army veteran-owned company based in Long Island, New York. As the On Scene First merchandise production and distribution partner that provides quality, custom-made products, fundraising and partnership opportunities, and phenomenal customer service, we are thrilled to share them with the rest of our public safety family. Make sure you check them out at www.squad-life.com and tell them Tracy sent you. Now, on with the show. All right, welcome to my guest, Chief Daniel DeYear. That's how you pronounce your name, right?
Correct.
Just wanted to make sure. You know how that goes? Like, you're not quite sure, is that the way to pronounce it? And it's spelled exactly the way that it is. Take that out. It is spelled exactly the way that it sounds. So, Chief, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. While our guests won't be able to see us, I haven't branched into doing the visual part of the podcast yet, so they'll only be hearing us. But I have to say, the display of years of service stuff behind you is pretty impressive. So it looks very nice. And maybe I'll share that picture, with the podcast release. But welcome. Before we have you introduce yourself, I'll give my listeners a little quick rundown on how I met you. And I just thought it was pretty cool. And it's something, and you said something when you kind of introduced yourself. And I think about that. I still think about that today. But I had attended an Oklahoma public safety conference back in October. And as many folks know, I travel a lot. And a lot of times I will grab some food, head back to my room, sit in the room, eat there, catch up on work, etc. And every once in a while, I'm a firm believer, and we are strategically put in places that we are supposed to be. And for whatever reason, I decided to go down to the bar area at the hotel we were staying at, and I ordered my food there. I sat there for a while, and I was getting the food ready to go back to the room, and you had just walked over and you introduced yourself and you said, "May I join you for dinner?" And I have to say, I was a little taken aback because I don't think folks are doing that these days. So maybe after you introduce yourself, we can kind of come back to that and just talk about that a little bit, because I do think that's important, especially in some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today. But welcome, Chief. Would you please, for my listeners, just give a little bit about yourself, as to, how you got into public safety, who you were in the early parts of your career, and who are you now today?
Okay. Well, I'm Daniel DeYear. I'm originally from the Bronx in New York City, but I finished going to high school in Rhode Island, so I'm a New Englander.
Right
And
on.
I usually have to explain it to people because I'm not a fan of the Yankees, Mets, Giants, or Jets. I'm a Red Sox, Celtics, Patriots, Bruins fan. So I have to clarify that for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I kind of got into the fire service by a weird set of circumstances. I really think a big factor in it was being from New York City in the 60s and then into the 70s. There was so many fires in the Bronx. and they were literally burning the city down, and it was part of our life almost. It just I can remember as a kid, you could smell fire all the time. And we moved out to Long Island. We lived in a couple of places in a short period of time, and then made our way to New England. But I ended up becoming a big Boy Scout. And as I was going through the Boy Scout process, there was a firemanship merit badge. And in doing that, you had to go to the local firehouse. It was just a volunteer fire department. And you had to interview the fire chief and ask questions on fire safety and all that stuff.
Yep.
And while I was there, the fire chief said, they have a junior firefighter program that you can become a firefighter at 14 years of age. And it really shocked me, but I had nobody in the fire service. I'm not a generational or, somebody that's dad or somebody was part of the
Yeah.
fire service or my mother. Now, my mom and dad were both military. They weren't career military, but they both served in Korea during the Korean conflict, and they're both buried at DFW National Cemetery. But I think back then, there was a bigger focus on serving in your community, no matter where it was. It
Yeah.
was not saying nobody was saying you had to be a police officer or a firefighter or a teacher or a nurse, but whatever it is that you do, you still should be serving your community on the ball fields or at church or wherever. And
Yep.
so I was always kind of indoctrinated into service, and I did become a junior firefighter. I don't really tell too many people that because a lot of people struggle with when I tell them I retired after 45 years of service. Now it's been 18 months ago, but I really had 7 years before that, or 6 years before that I had been exposed
Wow.
to the fire service. So I hate to tell people that I've got over 50 years of exposure in the fire service now, because that makes me sound way older than I ever wanted to
See,
be. But
I would include that in the 50 years. And the reason why I say that is because I haven't been able to do too much with it recently, but I was one of the original instructors for our local Explorer program. And I'm looking at a couple of the kids that graduated out of the program at 18, and they moved right on to our local fire department, and a couple went to our neighboring departments. And so to me, that's years of service, right? Because as a young junior firefighter and an explorer, you're still serving in a public safety capacity. So I think you should add that time on to your service.
right. Well, and if I think about it, I became certified as an emergency medical technician, an EMT,
Yep.
just a few months after I got my driver's license.
Right?
In
See?
fact, my parents are gone, but my dad, there was a few times my dad drove me to fires that I had to respond to. And I had a neighbor that typically would pick me up, but
That's
I wasn't
awesome.
even driving. So now on the flip side, that kind of played a factor into, I think, my journey in the fire service. But both good and bad. There was a
Yep.
bad aspect of that as well. But so I came to Texas. I ended up going to work with the Carrollton Fire Department, which is a suburb of Dallas. I worked there for almost 10 years, and I was one of the few folks who got a college degree and had a lot of certifications. And by the grace of God, I got selected to go to work for the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. And for 2 years, I traveled in a suitcase, and I was responsible for the fire and life safety at the American embassies and consulates.
Wow.
It sounds like a glamorous job. I did get to see a lot of the world. I didn't see the whole world, but I saw a good chunk of it. And it was rewarding. But my wife and I were dating at the time, and I finally made the decision that I was done living in a suitcase and traveling around. And then the Persian Gulf War started, and they put a cease travel on our passports. So I came back to Dallas and got on the Dallas Fire Department, and then spent the last 32 years of my career in Dallas. I had spent many, 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 many years as a firefighter and a paramedic, and then I had become a driver engineer, and then a lieutenant, and then a captain. And I was a captain on a ladder truck. I was the fire academy commander, and then I became a battalion chief, and then a section chief, and finally got appointed to a deputy chief position where I pretty much spent the last, I guess it would have been 12 years of my career. I guess 11 years of my career. I was a deputy chief.
That's a pretty impressive resume for sure.
Yeah, and along the way, I had a lot of unique experiences, but that's kind of where I got to retiring finally from the fire department. But now I speak and teach pretty much full time. Every week, I'm usually out somewhere speaking or teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's how our paths crossed. And so my question to you is, what was it in your head? Because what I will say is you just simply walking over to me. There were all kinds of people there, but you walked over to me and you said, "Hey, would you like to share dinner?" What was it with you? Because you said this is something that you do. I would love to know, why you did that, because you and I actually spent the next 3 days just having great conversations and moving through the conference together. Fortunately, we didn't get to see each other speak. Oh, you did come in mine for you were able to come into mine for just a little bit, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to see you speak, which I was disappointed about. But what kind of prompted you to come over and just kind of start that random conversation?
I think it was several things, but one of the things that's interesting about traveling out of town or out of state to speak is you often don't know anybody that's there.
Yep.
Now, when I speak and travel around the state of Texas, it's always like a homecoming. I'll end up seeing 5, 10, 50 people I haven't seen in a long time. So we're catching up. But yeah, you and I were both on the schedule to speak at the conference in Norman, Oklahoma.
Yep.
We own a home there actually, and I had gone up a couple days earlier and tinkered with the house a little bit. But I had seen the lineup of everybody that was speaking, and I didn't know anybody, but I had seen yours, and I knew you spoke on mental health or mental health related challenges in the fire service. And I thought, if I saw you, I was going to try to talk to you and just to pick your brain on a few things. And ironically, I am not your mental health lecturer, but I've started to speak a lot now more on mental health, especially when I do my company officer symposiums. It's a big subject that the students really want to talk at length about. And at the end of my career, I had done some soul searching, and I had sat in a program where a doctor had given a presentation after I had spoken. I had sat through her presentation, and at the same time, I had read an article about the U.S. Surgeon General was basically notifying the country there was an epidemic that preceded COVID that was actually getting worse by the day,
Yep.
equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your health. And it's basically isolation and loneliness. And at the end of the article, it talked about some simple things to start doing. And it was one of the 4 things was never eat alone. And I had just read that article.
Wow.
And what was unique was, and I don't know if you recall it this way, but usually when I've gone to a conference, and this was a fire-based and police-based and EMS-based conference, I had a couple people that had come up to me and said, "Yeah, we're glad you're here," and they shook my hand, but they basically walked away, and I didn't feel very welcomed. And at the embassy suites, they're giving out free drinks for a couple
Right.
hours and snacks, and I wasn't really wanting to have much to drink because I was speaking the next day. And I had sat down at the bar, and I think there was 2 seats between us, I think,
Yep.
originally. And I
Yep.
got to thinking, you know what? I'm not going to sit here all by myself at the bar and just eat. And that's what prompted me. I thought, what the heck? And I had known who you were because I had seen your name in the lineup, but I did not recognize you. I didn't know it was
Yeah,
you.
I was in my travel attire. The
Okay.
hair was up, the comfy clothes. I was in that mode.
Well, but I'd never met you before, and it was
Yeah.
kind of awkward, because originally I don't know if you remember what I said. It's like, hey, I'm doing this on a professional level.
Yes, yes. You
I'm
did
happily
preface it
married.
with
You're
that, like, I'm not
I
trying
just
to be a
wanted to see how
weirdo.
that's going. Yeah, yeah, and it's like, and then I think within just seconds, I realized you were the speaker that was speaking like before me on one of those days because I spoke twice, and I think you spoke twice too, or
Yes. Yep.
once.
Yep.
But one of those classes you were speaking before I was, so I knew I was following you in the classroom. So yeah, so that it was really kind of one of those things where I thought, nobody should be sitting by themselves eating, and it kind of validated it if you think about it, because it was really the first time I've ever done that, just to a complete stranger, just saying,
Right.
"Hey, nice to meet you. Let's not just sit here by ourselves," because it seemed like you'd been by yourself for a while, sitting there at the bar too.
Yeah.
So, and I just think it's one of those things. So now I think I pay more attention now, I think, to some of the people that are around me, because it talks about, that loneliness and isolation, and our world is really designed for that. Now, don't get me wrong. there's periods of time you want to sit and rest, but or reflect. But I know there's just a lot of people that aren't out there introducing themselves to people because they're more introverted and they don't really want to be around that. And I respect all of that, but I just that's what made me decide what the heck.
Well, I'm very glad you did because, like I said, over the next couple of days, we shared several meals actually, and had a lot of really great conversations. But I do think it's interesting that you pointed out the article that you had just read, and I have been recently trying to move back to a place where I used to be. And this is going to kind of lead right into some of the conversations that I envision us having just based on both of our passions. One being people driven to begin with, and number two, that mental health aspect and the challenges that we experience in public safety as a whole. And I think it was only of recently that this particular conference was adding the dispatcher track. So, where I do have history in the fire service in my community, I was there to speak on the dispatcher track, and so that's kind of where we connected. But what I thought was interesting was that when you made mention of this article, I've been traveling teaching 911 telecommunicators across the country since 2006. So it's been a minute. And one of the things that I used to do whenever I would travel was I would sit at the bar. I would have conversations with the bartender. I would chit chat with people next to me. And when you kind of approached me with that, and we had the conversation about how you had read the article and it says nobody should eat alone, I realized how isolated I really am when I'm traveling. So, somebody who used to be a very outgoing, would kind of talk to anyone, that 1000% changed after I had gone through my challenges with mental health. Had, a nervousness, a fear of talking to people, just this very a different sense of hypervigilance, being super aware of everyone that's around me and that somebody was going to do something bad. So, it had been something that I had been working on, is not sitting in my room the entire time. And so in our case, it worked. It
Yeah,
worked. So
it
thank you
did.
for approaching me.
Okay.
I truly appreciate that. And then so some of the conversations that we had in your speaking, you had mentioned to me that you had I don't want to really say passion, but maybe it is a passion to speak to folks, mostly for you in the fire service, but my listeners, they're 911, police, fire, EMS, all aspects of public safety. But you talk a lot about losing coworkers in the line of duty. Would you say that's accurate?
I have been exposed to, I happen to have worked in a department and served in a capacity where I was involved with a lot of loss. Yes.
Yeah. And while we don't need to know the numbers, just know that it is quite a significant number, if you will. And I would ask, whereabouts in your career did you realize, like, hey, I think this is something that we need to be talking more about? I don't see a lot of that in the 911 space because of we don't have a physical, um, physically challenging job, if you will, where you would walk into work and, be injured as such and not be able to come home. But we are losing a lot of our folks in the 911 space to mental health. And as far as I'm concerned, I know it's not officially listed as a line of duty death, but to me, when we are losing our folks even to suicide, I feel like that could be considered a line of duty death. But at what point in your career did you feel like, hey, this is definitely something we need to be talking more about?
Uh, I don't know if I can pinpoint a specific time. Uh, I had been involved in a lot of I mean, obviously anybody that works for a big city fire department like the city of Dallas, there's a lot of tragedy and a lot of death on a normal basis, just even day to day with the community. But um, I had been in a couple of unique situations. I had responded to the Delta 191 plane crash on October 2nd of 1985 at DFW Airport. And afterwards, a few days later, there was a gathering of folks, and it's the first time I'd ever heard the word CISM. Now, I had been in the fire service for, I guess over 10 years, but I'd been a paid firefighter for 6 years, and here we are talking about, or actually 7 years, and here we are talking about CISM and our mental health following this incident. And the fire service had never even been exposed to that before. Nobody had even talked about it. I didn't even know what it was.
Right.
And it was one of those interesting things because I can remember one of the gentlemen who spoke to the group. He was a pastor of some sort. He had a religious affiliation, if you would, but I have no idea what denomination or what. But I remember him giving some advice. He said, if you drink, that's okay, but never drink when you're down. Always drink when you're up. So if you're down, do not look for alcohol. And
Wow.
it resonated with me. It's like the only thing I left the meeting with.
That's a very powerful piece of advice.
Yeah, and so I still to this very day still share that same. I just repeat that because I know
Yeah.
how impactful it was in my life. But I had my rookie school partner, Vinny Davis, was killed in a building collapse in 2002. Our lieutenant, who was our instructor in our rookie school, he died in a three-alarm apartment fire up in far north Dallas. And I had just been around a lot of firefighter deaths on the job, and it kind of culminated in 2013. In 2013, I was the deputy chief of the training division, and I apparently like the big six cities in Texas: Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and El Paso. Every year, one of those departments has a member who serves on the state fire marshal's line of duty death task force. And in 2013, that was going to be Dallas's turn. And I had just gotten promoted and moved over into the training division in, I think, September. And lo and behold, I go down to Austin. I say, what am I supposed to do? And they tell me what I would be doing if there was a fatality. And I had asked how many people had died that year in Texas, and I believe there were none. And then the year before, I think there was one, and the year before that, there was none. So I just thought, okay, this is just going to be something I'll put on my resume. I helped serve on the team, but we're not going to do anything. Well, that didn't happen. In a 144-day period of time, my name is on four different reports that result in the deaths of 20 first responders in
Wow.
144 days. So it started with Bryan, Texas. They lost two fire lieutenants in a big box fire at the Knights of Columbus Hall. They were killed in the fire. The explosion in West Texas that killed 12 first responders. One of those was Kenny Harris. He was a captain in the Dallas Fire Department and a friend of mine. He was killed there. On May 20th, we had a fire fatality in Dallas. We had Stan Wilson, who got caught in a building collapse on May 20th. And then 11 days later, they had five firefighters killed in Houston in the Southwest End fire. My name is on all of those reports, and I was involved in the investigation in the process for each of those in some form or fashion. So it what ended up happening is I had several organizations that hold annual conferences in the state of Texas. Somebody said, hey, we know this guy had a lot of experience with death and just in the last year or so, let's have him come speak to us. And by that time, I was still processing, if you would,
Yeah.
because I'd seen a lot of commonalities. I'd seen things that, a lot of our attitudes and a lot of our culture is kind of can contribute to the decisions we make in those split second life and death calls at a fire scene. So I started speaking on line of duty deaths, but I spoke on the perspective of our culture and our beliefs and our attitudes. And are we really prepared every day that we go to work? And then I also got to looking in the fire service and realizing at the time, and it had been going on for about 5 years, but there was all these NIST studies that had come out earlier, a few years earlier, or right about that time. It was a big push. But you had people talking about firefighters need to be more safe on the fire scene. But then the mentality of the firefighters was that, okay, you're telling us not to go into the burning buildings, we're going to let people die. Well, nobody was ever saying that, and it became a conflict basically.
Yeah.
Are we too safety oriented? Are we number one? Are we number two? And the more I saw that, the more I realized that, I have an experience with this up close and personal. And a lot of these folks that are arguing this, they've not had to go, you know, tell a family their loved one is dead, or had to hand somebody a helmet or a badge at a funeral. And I got to realizing, it's so easy to sit at that kitchen table and talk about something that you think you know about, but you don't.
Right.
And so that's where I got kind of into the public speaking circuit, if you would. At the same time, somebody had come to me about doing a company officer symposium where we were teaching lieutenants and captains how to be, accountable and more responsible for their roles. And so I kind of have a dual track, if you would, over the years speaking. I pretty much speak on line of duty deaths and culture, and now I've been speaking on company officer development and enhancement. Most recently, I've kind of woven it all back into one track now, where I just talk about our accountability for service. I mean, I think the fire service is the last bastion of hope in our country for the word service. I mean, most fire departments in the United States are still volunteer, and as men and women with a heart to serve their community. That doesn't exist.
That's the type of fire department that I currently serve on right now. We are a call volunteer fire department, and
Mm-hmm.
when I'm sitting in my home, so my husband is the deputy fire chief on the call fire department. My daughter is 21, and she's recently joined the fire department, as is her boyfriend. And so we'll be sitting at home, watching a movie or eating dinner, and the tone goes off, and they all go. And I'll watch the grandbaby. See, I've morphed into a new role where, maybe back in the day I would respond as well, but these days I will stay home and cuddle that baby.
Okay, there you go. Doing the grandma thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you talk about line of duty death and culture, what would you say the most important thing? And so just to kind of come back around, that I know that there's a lot of folks that will be listening to this that come from the 911 space as well. And I know that a lot of the culture things are very similar across, all disciplines. But I also know, with the loss that our folks have been experiencing, whether it's an unexpected medical emergency because of kind of, the habits that we have in our public safety places, and the loss through losing their battle to depression. So I'm just curious if you have any words of wisdom to offer, as far as what would be the most important message that you would want any discipline taking away from loss and culture, and how they kind of go together, because I can't visualize it, so I'd like you to kind of to verbalize it for us.
Well, I think it's very complex, but obviously coming into our line of work, whether it's a dispatcher or a police officer, EMS or fire, or all the above. I mean, clearly in the Dallas area, EMS and fire are the same. The
Yep.
Dallas Fire Department, most of the surrounding communities are, all the paramedics are firefighters as well. But often overlooked in some of the CISM processes that I've participated in over the years, because I've been on their team forever, was all the dispatches were overlooked. I mean, it was
Yep.
just and the other place that was often overlooked was the fire investigators. So many times we would do a debriefing or diffusing, and nobody had invited the fire investigators. Well, we left the bodies with the fire investigators at the fire scene when we finally left, and then
Right.
we're now processing that, but nobody even had them on the list to include them in a debriefing or diffusing. But I think it's interesting, because I don't think the fire service is more. Matter of fact, the fire service clearly is not as deadly as it used to be. There's less people who die in fires, but we respond to more incidents now on the EMS side of it. We see more depression, we see homelessness, we see the mental illness, we see the drug abuse, we see the violence, in people's homes, and the despair that people live in, and that, and none of that's even death. That's just this challenge of what we do. I think there's a lot of people that come into the fire service not understanding what the job really entails. Uh,
Amen.
so I think there is a disconnect. I think sometimes on the recruiting process that we use, we're still saying so focused on, oh, you got to pass a candidate physical agility test, and you got to be able to drag this much weight and run up these stairs, and nobody even talks about, are you mentally fit to even come onto this job? That there really isn't a process for that.
Yeah. And with
And
it,
then
and on the dispatcher side, you're passing typing tests and the ability to multitask and things like that. So yes, spot on with that. We're not making sure. And I think there might be a line, right? That like, how do we know that folks are mentally fit to do this job?
right, and I don't I'm aware that there are some fire departments now that are giving a test of some form or fashion. I don't know how valid it is or if it's been successful or not, but I think it could weed out some people that maybe would not be a good fit.
Yeah.
So here's something ironically that I came to change my view on over the years. I used to be the academy commander years ago, and I could tell at the end of the first day which recruits were military, had served in the military. The men and women that had served in the military, they stood out from all the other recruits because they were accountable. They were
Yep.
accountable for all their actions. Nobody had to tell them anything. And I used to say they made the best firefighters, but now I don't say that anymore. Because I think if you had military experience, your indoctrination into the fire department is going to be pretty seamless. It's going to be great, and you will do well. But if you had served in combat and you had seen horrible things in foreign lands, and now you come back and you're in your own neighborhood or your own hood, if you would, or town, and now you're seeing that same thing, it's opening a lot of wounds, a lot of
Yeah.
baggage. And so I don't say that because I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, Dallas has been plagued with a lot of suicides in the last like 5 to 10 years. Well, as a matter of fact, somebody had recently said that in the last 5 years, we'd had more suicides than the previous 45 years. I mean,
Wow.
it's spiked that much, and it's a concern. And I don't think it's Dallas. I think that the entire fire service is like that. I think the big disconnect is, like volunteers get that you're serving your community, but in the paid professional fire department, there's a paycheck and benefits and days off and things that are comforting to you, which are necessary, and those are all good things. But if that's your only motivation, in other words, if you're just wanting a paycheck and you're wanting to just, take off as much time as you want and you're not focused on serving, then I think when the ugly things happen, you have no drawer to file that in. I think, if you would, I hate to
Yep.
use that term, but
That's actually the analogy I often use when I talk about EMDR for treatment of PTSD.
right. So, but the word service, if you're serving other people, that comes with a sacrifice. It's not something that's easy. It's work. It's hard because you're serving some, and like just an example you said a second ago, if your whole family was at your house and the tones dropped, you still would like to go to the scene and help people, but instead you're going to take care of the grandbaby. And
Yep.
there's probably times that sucks. Maybe the baby's not feeling well and you've got a headache and now the baby's crying, but you're serving your family, you're serving your grandchild, and that comes with a sacrifice. And the same
Yep.
thing with the firefighters. I mean, I definitely know what it's like to get up at 3:30 in the morning, having had hardly any sleep for the previous 24 hours, and you go out on a run that's just a BS run. You're putting grandma back in bed, or it's a homeless guy underneath the bridge, or somebody's calling you because they stubbed their toe or their hemorrhoids are bothering them.
Yep.
Everybody that's been in the fire service has been on those runs, and it's frustrating. I mean, and it wears you down, and you do see you get a very jaded look because you see the very negative side of our world on a daily basis. And I don't understand how people that come into the fire service aren't more clear that that's going to happen. I don't think we do a good job of telling folks that this isn't, the kids aren't going to always hug you or smile and wave at you.
Yeah.
Everybody loves the fire truck and everybody loves the firefighter, but it's not always like that. And how do you deal with that? And then I think a lot of things that we're doing in the fire service, I don't know about the New England area, but in the Texas area, we've been working a 24, 48-hour schedule for years.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden they're wanting to work a 48-96 schedule. So now what happens when you have a bad call at 5:30 in the morning on your second shift and you haven't second half of your shift and you haven't had much sleep and you see something horrible or something that just catches up to your nerves because you're exhausted and you go home for 96 hours, nobody sees you? I mean,
Wow.
there's a lot of people who live by themselves and now they're door dashing food and buying stuff from Amazon and literally never leave their home or their apartment. And they're processing the grief that they saw from a couple days earlier. I think I mean, everybody's living on that phone. Everybody's on that phone. Nobody's paying attention to folks around them. And I think that's a concern. And I don't know for sure, but I think someday somebody's going to figure it all out and it's going to be super, super simple. We've been looking at it and we just couldn't connect the most basic of two dots.
Well, I think
People
that I
just need
think
to,
I think you're 100% as I'm sitting here saying, well, when you approached me, I was probably sitting on my phone because of that, just the convenience of just disconnecting and checking out. And I think you're 100% right is that, that much time off away from folks, it can be very dangerous and scary. So I feel like if they're moving to schedules like that, there should be mechanisms in place to make sure that folks are being checked on, number one. But then it's going to come back to what I often refer to as reaching in, right? And so one of the things that we do tell our folks these days, I know when I started we didn't, and even in some of the classes I teach, I'll ask folks that have been there for, 5 years, 6 years. Were you hearing about mental health? Were you hearing about, what you should be on the lookout for even just 5 to 7 years ago? And a lot of folks were not. We're getting better at that today. But a lot of folks don't understand the magnitude of not being able to reach out in that darkest moment. And so we do have to get better at reaching in for those that can't reach out. Would you agree that that has to become a component of this?
yes, for more than 25 years, I was on our CISM team. Now, I know that concept is kind of going away in the fire service now. There's a bigger lean towards the peer support group and the resiliency programs and the mental health moving forward. But we're still failing somewhere. That's clear with our numbers and the incidents
Yes,
that have happened.
agreed.
Um, but yeah, so that I think the concern about people reacting negatively or sometimes it's just physiologically, your diet changes, your sleep habits change. Most firefighters or EMS workers, and I'm imagining clearly dispatchers as well, their circadian sleep cycles are messed up, and then you don't just walk home and say, yeah, I had a good day at the office, and you read the paper and go to bed like our parents may have done in their
Yep, yep.
lifetime. You're trying to process things. And of course, most of us are all focused on doing better. So there's always that guessing, could we have done something better? Could we have done something different? And it weighs on you. And I think where the struggles start to come, where people start getting PTSD or just difficulty in processing something, I don't think it's clear to the rest of the world that that's okay. That's normal. It's not. So I know for me, I shared with you the 1985 plane crash. I I did not know I had PTSD from that crash. I didn't. Matter of fact, if we were talking the day after or 3 days after, I would have said, no, I'm
I'm
processing it
fine.
just fine.
Yep.
And I had some friends came up to me afterwards, like even like years later, and said, I checked in on you and you swore you were fine. And I said, I was fine. And they said, yeah, but I came to find out like that third day when I was talking to you, you hadn't slept in 3 days. And I said, well, I just had a lot on my mind. And
Right.
I didn't feel tired. I wasn't tired. I mean, I would lay down because I felt fatigued, but 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes later, I was back up and my mind was racing, and it was just putting those things, like I said, back into that file drawer. But for me, it came down to so I never really got diagnosed with PTSD after the Delta One plane crash. I just know I had it, but
Yeah.
it went away. It went away. But I also the events of 9/11. I was in New York City on the way to a funeral in Queens when the American Airlines plane crashed in Rockaways and killed 260 or 80 people. I knew people who lived in that neighborhood where the plane came down, and I responded to that. I had also been to another plane crash at DFW Airport in 1988, and I was instrumental in helping taking one of the bodies off the plane. I ended up taking the flight attendant that was at the back of the plane off the plane. So I'd been exposed to all these horrible scenarios, not to mention all the line of duty deaths. In the time I've been in Texas, Dallas has had 27 line of duty deaths in the fire department, not to mention the suicides. And some of those folks were dear to my heart. I mean, they were people I worked with and knew. And so I've always been around this all the time. So I think I led to a minute ago, I had sat in a presentation of maybe 2, 3 years ago. I guess it would have been 2 years ago. And this woman spoke about why so many firefighters retire and they're dead within 3 years. Well, that had my attention because I'm one of the old guys and I was getting ready to
Right?
retire. And I thought, okay, well, I don't want to be that guy. So, and she shared just a lot of information. And it was some of it I already knew and some of it I didn't know. And if you want, if we have time at the end, I'll share that with y'all, which helped
Please.
me later on. But I remember coming home to my family, and I had shared some of that information with my wife, and I had made some comment, and my wife asked, was I going to go talk to a counselor? I had never talked to a counselor in my life at this point. I mean, I was in my late, I actually was 63 years of age, and had never been in a counseling session. And I'd had all these incidents, everything from my rookie school partner getting killed and my lieutenant getting killed, and people very close to me and very dear. And then investigating, 20 deaths in a 144-day period. I had a lot of people always checked in on me, and they'd always call me up and say, "Hey, you okay?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I'm fine." I mean, I think that people don't realize it's not like you look at your hand and you're bleeding and you say, "Oh, I obviously have a cut. I didn't even know I cut myself." But I think the emotional processes that we struggle with, you don't know that you're struggling with it. You just don't know. It's not like you can easily see blood and you have a
Right.
cut. So I
Well,
I
because I don't mean to interrupt you, but as you're speaking, one of the things that I just kind of want to ask you is, and you may have just alluded to it, but is why didn't you think that it would make sense to go speak to somebody? And is it because the injuries that a lot of time we experience, especially with 911 telecommunicators, because it's different, right? It's like they're 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 hearing versus physically responding, which can make it a little bit different because they're creating their own visions in their head, right? And they are not like sugar plums. But my question to you is why didn't you think it made sense? Is it lack of education? Is it you just didn't feel like you needed to get any type of mental health help? What do you think it was that you're like, no, I'm good, but not really?
well, so it wasn't a lack of education because I had the education. I was on the CISM team and had been for years. I'd been
Yeah, you were what I refer you were what I refer to as the carpenter whose house isn't finished.
Yeah, I guess so. That's probably a good analogy.
Yep. Or the plumber with a leaky faucet.
Well, and once again, I think there were times where somebody would say to me, "Do you think you need to go talk to somebody?" And I'd say, yeah, let me look into that and think about it. And I think, do I? Do I? And it's like, no, everything's going fine. My kids have a soccer game tomorrow night, and we're doing this, and we're going to take a vacation here, and everything else was going well. And what ended up so long story short, I ended up going to the counseling company here. That was a first responder, fire department, police department focused agency, and I went through all these little testing and interview questions, and I think I went through 2 counseling sessions, and they called me back in. They said, "Well, you don't have PTSD," and I said, "See, I knew I didn't have PTSD." And she smiled at me and she said, "You have CPTSD." And I said, what the hell CPTSD? I didn't know what that
I'm
was.
just, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, how does he not have PTSD? And then, okay, fair.
Yeah.
Explain what CPTSD is for those who may not know.
So, so post-traumatic stress disorder, but mine was complex because based on the 45 years of what I'd been doing my whole life, that was my baseline.
Yeah.
In other words, getting in a car and going to a multiple alarm fire where a colleague of mine, we're digging him out of the rubble and he's deader than a hammer. I'm Mr. Ice. In fact, my wife said that to me. She said, a kid could get run over by a car in front of our house right now, and you'd be the Iceman. You'd be the only guy that would go out there, and you wouldn't be nervous, you wouldn't be jittery, you wouldn't raise your voice. You'd be matter of fact, and you'd do every single thing that needed to be done for the kid, and you handle it perfectly. She said, if the vacuum cleaner quit working tomorrow, you lose your full flipping mind.
Oh,
And so,
yeah, that's
okay,
wow.
so that was the wake up call for me to realize what I was doing. So you had used this term already, and that was what I had lived in for 40 some years, was a
Wow, what a
massive
way to put it.
hypervigilant state. I was living in hypervigilance. And I think what really bothers me, I think the most is I literally had more than 10 years experience, had the Delta 191 plane crash behind me, had lost firefighters I'd worked with in fires before I was 25 years of age. I did not know that your brain didn't finish developing as a male until you're 25 years of age. So I had a lot of that stuff that was just ingrained into my brain, that this is how this is. You know, this is the world in which we that I chose to work in, that I serve in, and that I'm happy and proud to be a part of. But it came with, and my kids to this day, they still joke because they said, you walk into a restaurant, by the time we sit at the table, you've looked at every single person in the restaurant and you've
Yep,
seen where the exit signs are, and you're looking to see if the sprinkler system's in the building or not, and where the fire
yep.
extinguisher is. She said, I still do live like that most of the time, but it's what makes, so if anybody's listening to this, if you're a dispatcher, you're a police officer, you're EMS, you're fire, and you're in a hypervigilant world, you need to be. That's what makes you great at what you do. That's why we're great at doing EMS, fire, police, dispatching. But it doesn't make for good spouses and parents and friends and neighbors. The rest of the world isn't living in a hypervigilant state with us. That's why we can all get together, you know, at a conference or drink a beer, and we can tell the stories, and you know, we know what we're talking about. But the rest of the world isn't operating like that. And
Wow.
that's what I had to realize and learn. And there was some tips that this lady had given that had prompted this, that, you know, I'd always heard that you don't read, you know, you don't look at your iPad or your phone or computer before you go to bed at night. But she was adamant that in the morning, for the first 45 minutes, do not look at your phone, do not look at your iPad, do not look at your email or your computer, and do not drink caffeine. And of course, there was a big murmur in the room, because it's like, what firefighters getting up, going to work, or what dispatchers getting up, going to work, and not drinking a cup of coffee.
Right.
And she was real quick to say, then as a doctor, a medical doctor who does counseling and mental health, I suggest y'all start setting your clock for 45 minutes earlier. And
Yeah.
that's where she talked about, you know, just it was what she was really telling everybody was mindfulness. You know, get up in the morning. God didn't create us to get up and be looking at 10,000 bits of information on a computer screen and pumping caffeine into our body before our body even fully wakes up. And she said, if you take a walk or you exercise, that's fine. If you just go sit in a chair and look out the window and see if the squirrels are out there, if the birds are out there, or is it raining, or is it cloudy, or does the grass need to be mowed, or who's picking up the trash today? And just wait. She said at minute 46, grab your phone, grab your cup of coffee, or whatever it is you do for caffeine, and have your way with your day. But don't do that for the first 45 minutes. Now, I'm not good at doing that still to this day,
Same. Yeah.
but I'm kind of retired now, right? So I'm not going to the firehouse. I'm not going to be responding to a critical incident. You know, I might be getting ready to go speak at a conference tomorrow, or, you know, 2 days later, but if I start to find myself on edge, then I'll quickly revert back to quit. You know, as a matter of fact, she even suggested not even reading in bed. She said, if you like to read and fall asleep, find a chair, find a couch, read, fall asleep there. But what jokingly is, she had said to a room full of firefighters, she said, your bed is for two things and two things only. And it's not eating, it's not reading, it's not, you know, looking at your computer or your emails or checking the weather, or just do all of that somewhere else. It'll train your body to go lay down and go to sleep. And so one of the counseling sessions I sat in, I participated in one with it was a Zoom meeting like this, and I just was I was proctoring this interview, and they were all talking about the sleep disruption and the sleep deprivation that they were all struggling with. And they were talking about how, like, even when they got home, they knew they were exhausted, but they couldn't sleep. They'd lay down, but their mind was still on hyperdrive. And in the video on the Zoom meeting, I could see there was like 6, 7 firefighters sitting at a table. 4 of them had a Monster Energy drink in front of them.
Yep.
And I was thinking, I finally had to interrupt and say, I'm an outsider. You can tell me to go away, but I don't drink caffeine hardly at all. I've never drank coffee. I've never drank
Same.
tea in my life. And I said, y'all talking about sleep habits, and I'm looking at every one of you that are pumping an insane amount of chemicals and caffeine into your body right now. No wonder why you can't lay down and sleep. I mean,
Right.
and a couple of them said, well, I'd be falling asleep right now, if I didn't have this drink. And I said, well, why is that a bad thing? I mean, maybe you need to go take a nap for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, or you need to go nap for 6 hours. Why are you forcing your body's chemistry to override that? That's not good. It's
No,
not
it's
healthy.
it's not healthy, and that's another whole conversation, that we could have. But unfortunately, we'll have to, wrap it up. But what I do want to come back to is you had mentioned, um, and I don't remember exactly how you mentioned it, but the importance of that once you come out of this space, right? So I left my 911 center after, just under 20 years, and I there was something that I didn't do that I think is really important, is that once we've reached kind of that the end of that career, whether it's through retirement or we leave our respective disciplines to move into, whether we're teaching like we do, consulting, or working for, a private vendor, is I think sometimes we forget to mourn the loss of who we were for so many years. But I think you mentioned that one of the presentations that you went to, that there were a couple things that you could mention for folks that, once they get onto the other side of it. Is that, did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think you're correct. That what my struggle was just to retire. I didn't want to let go of the identity of being a firefighter. That
Yeah.
that held too much weight on my heart, because that had been my identity my whole life. Even though I knew I was a father and a spouse and a brother and a friend and a neighbor, and wore a lot of other hats, but that was always my identity. And I guess I kind of correlated to the fact that, yeah, I still miss fighting fires. I would love to go to a fire right now and fight a fire, but I'd also would love to play center field again in baseball, or slalom race skis down a mountain. And those days have just come and gone. So it's like another chapter in your life that you need to move on to, but you take what you've learned and move forward. And it's we all see those signs that talk about it's not a destination. It's a journey.
Yeah.
It's the day-to-day process. And some days maybe you slide backwards a step or two, or some days you don't get moving forward like you want to. But if you keep putting the effort every day to move forward with your life and be of service in some form or fashion. That was another part of that article on the loneliness and isolation. They said, serve, call your church, call the Little League, call the Boy Scouts, and see if they're looking for another mentor or teacher or somebody who could just help give. And we all know that service comes with a sacrifice, but it's also the most rewarding thing there is on the face of the earth. I mean,
It
that's where
really
true
is.
joy is. So
It
that's why I look at public speaking now, is it gives me joy, because I feel like I'm passing along to other people what somebody I wish had passed along to me. And now I know I have that knowledge or that experience, and I'm just trying to make their life a little easier by sharing it with them. So that's where the reward comes in to me.
Yeah, well, I can attest to that. One of the things that I often do is when I'm struggling in my own mind, whether, that silly little voice in the back of the head's trying to tell me lies, I will often reach out to others. So as the noise is, chattering in my head, well reach into others, right? So I'll either send them a message or a picture of one of my stickers and just let them know you crossed my mind, just want to say hello to show them that they really do matter. But I think it's that engagement that comes back where most respond. If I had a dollar for the amount of times I received the response, like you have no idea how much I needed that, then I wouldn't even have to work. We all need that. We all need to have that purpose, but still the serving of others in a positive way, I think is really important. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, we need to wrap up. It's about that time. And Chief, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. Maybe someday we can come back and talk about some of the other very passionate topics that you choose to talk about. And until next time, Hero, thanks for
Yeah.
being here.
Well, thank you. If you ever are interested in having me come back on the show again, I definitely would do that. Thank you
Yeah.
very much for your time.
I have a few
Stay
other
safe, everybody.
conversation. I have a few other conversations that I'd like to have with you. So it's already
Yeah.
it's already brewing back here. So
Okay. Well, take some notes. Don't forget.
oh, I won't.
Yeah.
I got systems in place now these days. So
There you go.
thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Hey, heroes. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and follow us on our On Scene First social media so you too can keep up with our shenanigans. And make sure you get to know our friends over at Squad Life. You can start by heading over to their social media, giving them a follow, and thank them for being a hero sponsor. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and stay here. We need you.